All right, welcome back, everyone. We are working on my video series on different ways to make nav bars. And in my last one, we talked about a standard nav bar. And in this one, what we're going to do is we're going to use Flexbox, which is a wonderful display model for doing nav bars. And what you see here is my nav bar all set up for everything except for Flexbox. We haven't applied anything on Flexbox. And I'll go through the CSS that's on here. If you notice, this is a little different from the last video I did, the nav bar, the colors, and the way it's set up. There's a reason for it, and mainly just because I want to start over and try a different one. I always like to come up with new looks and new colors and things like that. But on this particular one, we're going to use CSS Tricks, a complete guide to Flexbox, as sort of our background. And before we get into that, we will take a look at the code from the previous example. That is not the one I'm looking for. Here we go. So let me just kind of remind you and highlight a little bit about the nav bar. A couple things that we have here. Number one, we're using a nav element, which is an HTML5 newer element, newish-er element. And we gave it an ID of main nav bar. And I did that so that we can target it directly. And then inside of the nav is an unordered list of links. Standard nav bar. The only difference between this and the last tutorial, I believe, is just the ID. And let's look at the standard styles that have been applied so far. We've got a background color on the main nav bar. That's the nav. We've removed all margin, and we added just a little bit of padding, 0.1 EM, and that's what gives that little border that you see just slightly on either side. I just want you to be able to see those clearly. In the unordered list, we've removed all bullets using list style type of none. We removed margin and padding. We just want to get rid of all of that in the unordered list. In our list item, we added some padding on the top and bottom, but not on the left and right. We removed margin from list item. There seemed to have been a little bit applied. So I just kind of fiddled around until I got it the way I wanted it. And then in our hyperlink, which is the main nav bar space A, we set a color. We removed the underline with the text decoration of none. We added some padding on the top and the bottom. And we added a white border to pixels. I did that also just for demonstration purposes. Wouldn't hurt to make your text bold as well if you choose to do so. I'll do that so you can see what it looks like. And then one last thing I wanted to talk about, and that is, let me just go ahead and see what that looks like, see if I like it. It's so-so. All right, but either way, it doesn't really matter. That's your choice if you want to do that or not. But what I want to talk about just real quick before I move on to the Flexbox is I just want to point out the selector that we have here. We have an ID selector. That's what the hashtag means. ID, it's a unique selector, so we can just select the main nav bar so that we don't target any other unordered lists, and there may be links in it. And we don't want to screw that up, so that's why we have a unique ID applied to the nav. And we target everything using that as sort of our basis. We're using descendant selectors where we have a space in between. And so we're saying basically, find an unordered list that's inside of an ID of main nav bar. Find a list item inside of that main nav bar, and find a hyperlink inside of main nav bar, and of course create a hover effect. And the thing I did with hover effect is I just swapped out the background color and color, so we've reversed the two. So at this point, we have our nav bar, and if you look here, you can see when we hover over a couple other items there. They all are whatever width it takes to fill the content inside. It's pretty solid. And now we're ready to talk Flexbox. So let's quick look at Flexbox here. In Flexbox, we have sort of two things that we're dealing with. One is the parent, which is considered a container. The other are the children or the items inside of the container. Now, this is a great technique for using nav bars, but you can also use it for layouts. We're going to focus on nav bars. And if you look at this, an unordered list is really the container because the items that are in it are all of our list items. So all of the Flexbox container elements are going to go into the UL, and anything we want to do with the list items go into the children of that UL, which is all the list items inside. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to change this. We're going to create a display of Flex. And I'm going to save my changes. Now watch what happens when all I do is add this one element. I change the display so that this is being displayed as the Flexbox. When I hit refresh, bam, I've got my horizontal nav bar. If I like that and that's all I want to do and I'm happy, I can leave it like that and we could be good to go. A couple other things I want to do is you'll notice I have this class equals current, and I want to target that one as well. I hadn't done that. One of the things I want to do is, if you notice when we hover over something, we change the background color and foreground color. I'm thinking let's just target anything that we do with the hover. Let's also target the current. I'm going to do main nav bar, and we'll just put a.current. Save our changes. So I just scroll down here a little bit, and let's go ahead and go back here and hit refresh. And right away, you'll see HTML is now highlighted. And that's a way of kind of indicating what page we're on. If I go to home, you'll see that that gets highlighted. If I go to CSS, that's highlighted. And JavaScript, that's highlighted as well. So that's what the current does. And the way that this works is on every nav bar, whichever page we're on, you add that class of current to the hyperlink. Okay, and then you target it this way. So just as a reference, let's look at JavaScript, for example. If I go to JavaScript, you'll see that class equals current is applied to the anchor tag, the href tag, that is for JavaScript to indicate we are currently on the JavaScript page. And you would do that for each of these. CSS, you see it there, etc. Index, you see it there. Okay, so we're back here. We've looked at the HTML. We're just going to focus now on our Flexbox model. In fact, most of the work we do will just be on the unordered list because the container can do so much. So let's take a look at some of the things that the container can do. Number one, flex direction. We can change the direction. Left to right, right to left, top to bottom, bottom to top. Let's take a look at that. And that's flex direction. And notice we have 4 items on here. Column, column reverse, row, row reverse. Now the default setting is row, and that means just from left to right. But let's go ahead and try the row reverse and watch the difference of this page when we add that. Notice home is on the left, JavaScript is on the right, everything is on the left-hand side of the nav bar. When I hit refresh, that row reverse reverses everything and moves it to the right-hand side, which is really handy if you want to do that. The other thing you can do is we don't have to just do it this way. We can turn this into a vertical nav bar by changing flex direction. So all I do here is I'm just going to go back here and go back to my step. And we're going to do column, for example. So let's say you want to make your nav bar a vertical nav bar. Just give it a display of column. There you go. And we're going to apply some styles a little bit later, probably in my next video. We're going to talk about responsive websites. We're going to make it so that when we're on a narrow device, that will be a vertical nav bar. And then we'll style this up just a little bit better so it looks better. Doesn't look too good. But you can also reverse that with a column reverse. So I save my changes. And when I hit refresh, you'll notice home will be on the bottom. JavaScript will be on the top. Okay, so that's flex direction. I'm going to put it back to row. And I'm going to leave it as is. Now, I didn't have to put row. That is the default setting. And so I just wanted to leave it there so you see what we can do. Next, let's take a look at the next item on the Flexbox. Not only do we have flex direction, you have flex wrap. This is really good if you're doing, say, like a grid of items that you want to have them just spill over to the next line. This is not a good idea for a nav bar. We don't want that to happen, so we're going to leave that alone and move along. We're going to look at flex flow, though, and this gets really fun. And the whole idea, it's actually not flex flow. It's called justify content, excuse me. I'm going to skip that one. It's a shorthand for flex direction, flex wrap. Since we're not doing flex wrap, I'm not going to cover that either. But let's talk about justify content. Because by default, it should be flex start, where everything's lined up on the left-hand side, and all remaining space goes to the right. Flex end reverses that. Center puts it in the center. Space between adds whatever remaining space is and sticks it inside, but leaves the first and last element on either side. Space around sort of evenly spaces them around. So let's just go ahead and look at each of those on our nav bar to see how that affects the nav bar. And so that's justify content. And let's start with center. Center's a really interesting one. So what I can do now is I can center all of my items in the middle of my navbar. There's a lot of navbars that do that. There's nothing wrong with that. So that's kind of an interesting one. Let's take a look. We did flex start was the original one, and flex end will actually be somewhat like we did with the row reverse. The only difference is, even though that's all on the right-hand side, we didn't reverse the order of our items. So we just pushed them all off to the right-hand side all together. Notice there's no gap in between each of these items. It just all remaining space is put to the other side, which is the beginning here. And then that's flex end. Let's take a look at a couple more. We can do space around. Space, I'm going to start with space between. I like that one. Save my changes. Space between leaves home, and the final link on the outer edges, all remaining space goes in between. This is not very practical for a nav bar, but this could be really cool with where you have grid items, maybe like an image gallery where you can have little thumbnail images. Where you want the left and right hand side to align, but the things in the middle can kind of resize. It's especially good if the width kind of has different sizes. And so that was space between. The last one is space around. And then we'll take a look at it, save our changes. And now notice there's a little bit of space everywhere, and it just sort of evenly spaces all of our items out. And at this point, we've hit the main things on the Flexbox container. Okay, I'm going to leave this as a center for now. And of course, you can leave it at the default value if you want. I'm not suggesting this is the best way to do it. In fact, with these borders, it's not a good idea. Actually, I might just go right back to we'll do the flex start. Sometimes the default values are default for a reason, because they're the most common, probably the best practice. And so we go back here. But if you want to center it now, you know how. Okay, so let's take a look at other things that we have. Now, if we go here, align items doesn't make as much sense. And the reason why it doesn't is I set it up so that everything is equal height. However, if you have different heights, this is something you might want to look at. And you can stretch them all out. This is really good for layouts, but we're not going to deal with that. And then finally, there's aligned content. This is good if you have multiple rows. We do not. So this is not a concern of ours. And basically, that ends all of the items we have on the container. So let's just take a look at some of the options we have for our children. So the first item, which you could use, is the idea of order. And what you can do is you can reorder items in the way in which they lay out. And if you look here, this is assuming you're doing like standard layout from left to right. The lower the number, the farther on the left they are. So if we give an order of 1 here, 1 here, 1 here, they're just going to be in whatever order they would be. But if you give any item, and it could be the first or the last item, a number of 2, and it will put it to the right of anything with an order number lower. And then anything, same thing goes here. So we go up in number in normal order. And we can use negative numbers as well. So if we want to force something on the far left always, a negative number is a great way to order it. So again, by default, it's just going to be the order in which they appear. And then we can change the order here. And we'll take a look at one example of how we might do that. The other one is an interesting one, and it's called Flex Grow. And this allows your item to grow and fit the space. And we can set flex grow to all of them to a certain value. But if you give one item a greater value, it will take up more of the given space. And this fills up the space. Now, let me show you what I did. I actually went in and adjusted my nav bar to sort of recreate that. And if you see here now, I've rearranged it so every button takes up the same amount of space if it's got it. So let's go ahead and get that coded so you can see. And here's the actual code for doing that. Notice the LI has a flex grow of 1. I removed padding from the list item. And then I just added a display of block to my hyperlink. And that was it to do that and make it fill. Now let's talk about order, because I mentioned that before. Okay, so I jumped open and I played around with order here. So let's just do one more. I'm just going to do this thing here. I'm going to do this edit as HTML. And I'm just going to create like a fourth link that's just a dummy text. Now let's just put about. And we'll just click here just to be done wherever. Okay, so now we have this about. And now look what happened with the JavaScript. And about became the last child. So let's just kind of walk through here, and we'll make adjustments as we go. Home is the first child. We did it in order of, let's see, 1, 2, 3. Order of 3 should be the third. And we'll fix this in just a moment. Okay, then we have the list item, which is the nth child 2, the second child. We said order of 1, that goes at the beginning. And then we have the nth child 3. And I'm just going to copy this, by the way, because I'm going to play around with this for a moment. And then we're going to click on here, and I'm going to add a new style, and I'm just going to paste that and change that to 4. And now we're going to do an order of 5. There we go. Now, at this point, I've reordered it, so JavaScript is still on the far right, which you don't have to do. But I just showed you how we can reorganize all of this. And let's just do one last thing. I'm going to target this home link here, which is first child. And then I'm going to do the flex grow. I'm going to give it 2. And now what I've just done is I've made the home bigger, fills up the space. It's at the center. And so I'm not saying this is what you want to do, but this is something you can do, playing around with order, playing around with flex grow. So you have endless possibilities, but you're going to have to get a little bit technical, and you're going to have to get a little fancy here with your pseudo selectors. Okay, so I'm going to leave you with this, and on my next video tutorial, we're going to talk about responsive web design. And so I'll show you how to make your navigation bar change based on the width of the screen. Okay, so stay tuned for that. I hope you enjoy it.